So our agenda today, I want to first talk about cloud adoption statistics. I mean, I think many people really underestimate what's going on with cloud, and I want to highlight that because that talks about why it's so important for the organization, why cloud computing is one of the very biggest trends going on in IT, and a trend that is going to be only growing over time. So we'll talk about cloud adoption statistics. Then we'll talk about cloud application deployment patterns. One of the great benefits of cloud is that it enables and accelerates application deployment. The question is, what's the right model to use for that in terms of architecture? So this is going to be about the process of putting applications in the cloud, how you design them, and so forth. Not at a very deep technical level, but more as general sort of, you might call them deployment patterns. Then we'll move on to building cloud skills. As I mentioned, I said we'd talk about that and sort of the importance of them and how to go about that, training, organizational skill, and so forth. And then we'll have time for questions, and I hope you'll submit questions. Chip, I was listening, but I didn't catch if you said how they should submit the questions, but I think there's a chat box or something that they can submit them to you. Is that right?
That's correct. They should actually use the questions module rather than chat. And we'll go ahead and we'll queue them up in the questions module, and we'll circle back to those at the end of the presentation.
Clearly, Chip is the guru of the webinar stuff. I'm sort of barely acquainted, but anyway, yeah, submit them in the questions, and that way we can, they can be forwarded to me, and I can address them as we go along, or as we finish up. So let's talk about cloud adoption and what's going on with that. And many people really underestimate what's going on in cloud computing and how powerful a trend it is. But here I've got some statistics. So just 3 weeks ago, maybe 4 weeks ago, Amazon announced its AWS, Amazon Web Services numbers. And it did $2.8 billion within AWS for the quarter with a 58% growth rate. So compared to July 2015, it said we're nearly 60% larger. And that's been pretty consistent, that growth rate. It's hovering somewhere around 60 to 70%. And they did $2.8 billion. That means they're on a run rate of something on the order of $11, $12 billion for the year. And really, this level of, within the technology industry, and maybe in every industry, that level of growth at that scale, at that size company, is really unprecedented. I mean, 60% growth on a $12 billion run rate, $11 or $12 billion run rate, is really unprecedented in most businesses. And that shows the power of what they're offering and how much user adoption is moving to cloud computing. And so, very impressive numbers. Amazon is clearly the leader in this space, but it's by no means the only significant player in this cloud computing area. Microsoft has its own offering called Azure, and it talks about its cloud numbers, but it's hard to really discern what is the computing part of that, sort of comparable to what Amazon offers, and what of that number that they announce is technology like Office 365, which are very powerful offerings, but aren't really germane to IT organizations who are going to place applications. It's very germane for writing email or doing documents or whatever it might be. But really, what we want to talk about here is IT organizations taking advantage of cloud computing as a way to deliver applications. So it's kind of difficult because they announce a general number, but I've gone back through, kind of extrapolated, correlated, interpolated all of the estimates I've seen for Azure, and a conservative number is $500 million per quarter, but with about 120% growth. So in other words, even though Amazon's growth rate is extremely impressive, Azure's is, very, very high, higher than AWS, as you might expect on a smaller base. But that's about a $2 billion run rate, growing at 100% plus per year. So obviously quite impressive. And Google is, probably is considered really the third of the big three, but it's sort of the smallest of the big three. Its numbers are unannounced, and it's lumped into the general Google numbers, which is mostly advertising. So it's hard to really know what that number is, but it's widely assumed at probably less than $1 billion a year. Growing pretty rapidly. I think it's fair to say that Google has not really focused on cloud computing over the past 3 or 4 years. It's had the offering, it's talked about it, but it hasn't been a core focus for the company or the organization. But my sense is a year and a half ago, they really started to say, this is a serious area. We should have a strong presence here. We can deliver a tremendous amount of value. What do we do about that? And one of the things they did was they went and hired a woman named Diane Green. And Diane Green is the founder, or co-founder, I should say, of VMware, which is, everybody's familiar with VMware. Very powerful infrastructure player. And she has come in and really is spearheading their effort to become a much bigger player in cloud computing. And they've started to really hire very strongly across the board within Google, and they're putting forward a lot of emphasis on enterprises, which is probably germane for everybody in this audience. So Google is, you might say, an understudy at this point, but ambition to get onto the main stage, and that's, we will expect to see them coming forward in the future as well. So these big three, and just by way of comparison, to really bring out how important or how big an initiative or how strong a trend this is, VMware, which is one of the biggest infrastructure players in the entire industry, by comparison, it did $1.7 billion last quarter. Not a bad quarter, but it's only seeing 6% growth. So really, it's almost barely growing. And so you can see that the trend toward cloud adoption is enormous, growing much faster than the rest of the industry. It's a big trend. So now that we sort of have kind of a point in time kind of thing, let's look at where this is going to go. This is projection on AWS and Azure revenues over the next 5 years, and you'll see why I've used this 5-year period in the next slide. But given those kind of growth rates, assuming that Amazon's going to grow at something like 50% a year, and Azure will continue at its 100% per year, over the next 5 years, we can see that just those two are going to be nearly $100 billion in revenue. I mean, that's an enormous amount of spend that's going to go into cloud computing, and that represents an enormous number of applications being deployed. So really, this is becoming, I call it the computing substrate of the IT industry, and really reflects, I got involved with cloud computing probably a decade ago when I first got exposed to it as a result of writing my book, Virtualization for Dummies. And when I saw AWS's infrastructure as a service, it just powerfully impacted me. I said, that is going to be the computing platform of the future. And now we're really starting to see that really take hold. So $100 billion by 2020 is going to be a very powerful trend. What does that mean, from the user side? So we've just talked about the providers, and it's clear that they're experiencing enormous growth, enormous adoption, enormous revenues. Let's talk about what it looks like from the user side. JP Morgan, which is a very large financial institution, does a lot of research within industries and so forth, did a survey of 200 large enterprise CIOs with an average IT spend of $600 million. So you can see that these are very large. Now that $600 million was the mean, and that ranged everywhere from organizations spending $10 to $20 million to organizations spending several billion dollars in IT. But the average was $600 million. So really reflective of what you might call the Fortune 2000. And what came across was an enormous amount of cloud adoption over the next 5 years. They asked them, what percentage of your applications are currently deployed within cloud providers? Amazon, Azure, Google. And what percentage do you expect by 2020? And as you can see from this chart, what they said was today, we have about 16% of our applications are deployed in cloud computing environments. But 2020, we're going to have 41% of our applications are going to be operating in cloud computing environments. Now, so the first observation is that's dramatic growth. that's getting on toward half of the entire application portfolio operating in cloud environments. So if you're a typical enterprise IT organization, a large enterprise IT organization, you're going to see something like almost half of your application portfolio operating in cloud environments. The key question is that I took away from that is, okay, you asked up through 2020, what happens in 2021, 22, 23, 24? In other words, does this level off at 41%, or is this just, a way station? It's going to be 41% in 2020, but by 2025 it might be 60% or 70%. And I guess, from my perspective, there's nothing that's going to top that off at 41%. That just happened to be, a question. What are you going to be doing in 5 years? And we're likely to see increased growth in cloud deployments. So it's likely that the future of IT is largely cloud-based. And in 10 years' time, this number might be something like 75%. So really that's a dominant reality for enterprise IT organizations. So let's talk about the implications of this. So first, I think I just said it, there's a massive shift to public cloud deployment. The future of IT is going to be very largely cloud-centered. I would assert, this is not universally shared, but I would assert that the public cloud is going to end up representing virtually all net new applications. So of that whole 100% application portfolio, that 41% of it is going to be residing in cloud environments. That's going to represent some amount of transfer. I'm going to take my current applications and migrate them to the cloud for any number of reasons. But it's also going to be all the new ones, I believe. Probably 90% of all net new applications are going to go into cloud environments. So when enterprise IT organizations sit down and say, okay, we're going to plan a new application, we're going to plan a new offering, a new set of functionality. One of the questions always is, where are we going to put it? Are we going to put it inside our own data center or some data center environment that we control, like a colo environment? Or are we going to put it in the cloud or something like that? And I believe that over the next 5 years, the nearly universal answer to that question about where will we put this new application will be, yeah, we're going to put it in the cloud environment. We're going to put it up in a public cloud environment. And the implication of that is that really cloud computing must be a core competence for enterprise IT organizations. So, 5 years ago, a lot of cloud adoption was by developers or so-called shadow IT. In other words, business units saying, the phrase was always, IT is the department of no. Whenever we go to IT, all we hear is why stuff can't get done. So business units would say, well, we're just going to go do it ourselves and we'll put it up in Amazon or something like that, so-called shadow IT. So meaning tactical kinds of adoption. We're going to put this particular application up there or something like that. What these stats imply is that this is going to move from a tactical adoption to a strategic adoption, meaning cloud computing will no longer be an individual choice for an individual application. It will be a general choice for the entire application fleet. So, that means that cloud computing must be a core competence for enterprise IT organizations. Now what I'd like to do is say, okay, let's, I hope this has provided a perspective that says, cloud is a really big deal. It's a core capability for enterprise IT organizations. Virtually all of your new applications are going to go to cloud environments and an increasing percentage of your current application portfolio. So an obvious question is, well, so what do those applications look like when they go into cloud environments? How am I going to deploy them? What's the right architectural patterns? And so I want to talk about that for a few minutes. Well, the first is what I call lift and shift, or really a widely shared term, which is basically you take an existing application as is, or you might take your existing application development pattern, your current architectural patterns, your current architectural designs, and you use them as is for a cloud environment. So let's talk about the benefits and the drawbacks of that approach. Well, one is if you have an existing application and you transfer it as is, you don't have to really do a lot of re-engineering. You just say, I'm going to pick it up, I'm going to move it into a cloud environment, make the adjustment to use Amazon's virtual machines instead of my own virtual machines, my own virtual VM environment. I'm going to use the same database. I'm going to run the database myself. I'm going to manage all the infrastructure and so forth. Well, it doesn't require a lot of re-engineering, which is very attractive. So you can make that migration, fairly quickly. It can be, as I said in this next bullet point, it can be fairly fast. So this isn't a sort of a 2-year process. You can do it relatively quickly, and it doesn't require a tremendous amount of staff reskilling. Obviously, you have to learn the fundamentals of using the cloud environment, but your sort of core patterns of I'm going to run this virtual machine in Amazon the way I run them internally. I'm going to install code the same way. I'm going to use the same management tools. I'm going to monitor it the same way. I'm going to update it in the same fashion, and so forth. You don't have to do a lot of reskilling. But I don't want to say that this is the best way to do it, or the only way to do it for sure, or the perfect way. There are some challenges around this. One of them is you often have poor application resilience. One of the general benefits of cloud computing environments is they can be much more resilient, provide better uptime than on-premise. And that's because of things like they have, giant server fleets. So if a particular server goes down, it's very easy to get another one. It's not like an on-premise environment where when a server breaks, it's like, oh, we have to get maintenance in. And until that's in, the application is down. Or if we want to transfer to another server, we've either got to buy one in, or we've got to find one that's free, et cetera, et cetera. So you commonly can get higher resilience in the infrastructure in cloud environments. But oftentimes applications are not designed for that. So what you really want is redundancy and failover. I'll be talking about that on the next slide. But if you use a lift and shift environment, or a lift and shift pattern, oftentimes your applications are not really designed to do that very easily. So you often find, what I've heard complaints by many organizations is, they think I'm going to take this application that I built and operated in my own environment, I'm going to move it to a cloud, and magically the availability is going to be higher. The downtime is going to be reduced. It's going to be fantastic because cloud is more reliable than my own environment. And what they find is, yeah, the cloud's more reliable, but my application doesn't really take advantage of that, isn't designed for that, and so I don't really have better uptime. So one drawback is, you may not really experience better application resilience. Another is that oftentimes the operational patterns that are make perfect sense for an on-premise environment can result in higher cloud costs. And let me give you an example of that. In a on-premise environment, let's say you have a report you run twice a month, and it's a report that gives you some statistics on inventory or something like that, or days outstanding of invoices, whatever it might be. Well, it makes perfect sense if you bought a server to run that application to just turn it up and let it run all the time. I mean, you've bought the server, you're not going to pay any extra for having it running. It's going to be up and available, and you don't have any problems with sort of getting somebody on the operations staff to bring it out of quiescent mode and bring it up and make it available and so forth. So you just turn it up and you let it run. It makes perfect sense. Well, in a cloud environment, for every hour that thing is running, you're paying for it running, even if you only use it for 4 hours a month. And so what can happen is you can end up having pretty high operational costs compared to what you might do if you operated your application differently or designed to be operated differently. So you can experience high cloud costs. And organizations sometimes experience what you might call sticker shock. They get the bill and they go, wow, I didn't expect it to be that much. I thought cloud was so cheap. Well, it can be if you operate your applications properly. So, high cloud costs. And we'll talk a little bit about how to address that in the next slide. And then there's little opportunity for competitive advantage. What I mean by that is one of the great benefits of cloud computing is it enables you to design and operate applications differently. It's easier to integrate different kinds of services and so forth. But if you just use the same old application that you built on-premise, it's harder to get competitive advantage. And that's particularly true if you're really running a kind of an industry standard package. You know, if your ERP system is just like everybody else's, well, you're not going to get much competitive advantage. So there are benefits to doing this lift and shift, but it has some drawbacks or some shortcomings. Let's talk about the next pattern you might use. So you can refactor your applications. And really what that means is, let me take better advantage of the way the cloud computing environment operates and the services it provides, and redesign my application to align with that. And you know, one common example is a move from vertical scaling to horizontal scaling. Typically, within most environments, if you sort of say, gosh, you know, we scoped this to be 1,000 users, but now we're getting 2,000 users, how do we, you know, support that load? The answer is buy a bigger computer, vertical scaling. Well, you know, very commonly that 1,000 to 2,000 might happen once a week, or once a day, or once a month, whatever it might be, or it might be, you know, sort of infrequent but occurring. Well, you can use what's called horizontal scaling. Rather than buying one big computer, you use one smaller computer for most of the month when you have low load, and then when you experience higher loads, you add a second computer and you spread the load across them. And that's a very common kind of move that aligns better with the cloud offering, and also works better for your costs, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. And you can operate with what are called auto-scaling groups. So instead of you having to pay attention to the load and you saying, well, oh, I'm getting higher load, let me spin something up, which becomes a human intervention operational activity, the cloud environment can say, I'm going to track this, and when the load gets at a certain point on one server, I'll automatically spin up another one. And you might not even be aware of it, but it's arranged to do that. You have to set up load balancers and make automatic, design it for automatic connections, and that's part of redesigning your application to align with the cloud offerings. So this is just two examples around scaling and auto-scaling, but there are many, many ways that you can say, I'm going to redesign my application to really align with the cloud offerings and take advantage of the way they operate, and so forth. The benefits you find is, one, you can raise the resiliency. So if you've gone to that horizontal scaling, maybe you have redundancy. Instead of one large computer, you're always running two small ones. If one of them goes down, your application is still up and running. It's not unavailable. So you can increase your application resiliency. You can be responsive to dynamic, I didn't say that very clearly, responsive to dynamic application loads, so that your application can dynamically adjust if you have unexpected or periodic application loads. You can maybe reduce your cloud costs. There's no costs turning something off and then bringing it back up. And so that in the example of you run that report once a month or twice a month, it's very easy to, during the off time when you don't need that server to be running with that application available, you can turn it down and only bring it up and run. And so all of a sudden you can really change your cost structure. And you get better alignment of the application with competitive needs. You know, if you need to have the ability to, support very heavy loads with caching, you can put caching into your application, use the provider's caching functionality, and that will help your application run better. So you can get better alignment of your application with competitive needs. There are some challenges around this, and I don't want to make it sound like it's, it sounds fantastic. The question is, what does it take to do that? Well, you typically have to refactor your application. You have to examine its design and say, how can I better align this with my provider's environment? How do I take better advantage of that? You may have to redesign it, refactor it, split functionality out, and migrate functionality to different servers or different application packages and so forth. And this inevitably requires greater staff skills. This isn't just like I'm going to run virtualization, but instead of my environment, I'll put it in the cloud environment. It's I'm going to redesign my application. I'm going to make it look more like the cloud environment that it runs in. I'm going to align it better. You have to have more skills on staff. You have to develop new skills. All right, let's talk about the next level, which is really a very dramatic re-envisioning of how you do things. So instead of, I'm going to take the application I've got and run it unchanged, or maybe change it enough to be better aligned with the cloud environment, I'm going to rethink the way I do business. And this is really a very exciting part of what's going on with cloud computing, and something that's increasingly an important part of the way organizations are using cloud environments. And really the phrase I use is, this creates new applications to compete in a software eating the world environment. And the person in the picture, in case you don't recognize him, is Mark Andreessen, who was one of the founders of Netscape, which was the very first application browser company, really helped catalyze the internet age. And he's gone on and done various things, and he now runs or co-runs a venture capital organization and is considered a real visionary. And about 4 years ago, he wrote an editorial for the Wall Street Journal where he said, software is eating the world. And the example he used was things like travel agents. You know, at one time, if you wanted to take an airplane flight somewhere, you had to call up a travel agency, and they knew all the stuff about getting, finding the flight and so forth. Well, those days are disappeared, right? Today, if you're going to take a flight, you do it yourself. You use an application that the carrier, United or American or whatever would be your local or favorite carrier, that they provide. Or you might use one of the aggregators, like Travelocity or something like that. That's an example. He said, really, we've started to see this accelerate, and we're seeing enormous change in the way that organizations do business online, the way they engage with customers, the way that they interact with partners and so forth. So this is a sort of a, software eating the world environment. Some examples of this are, you might have an application that you provide your customers. If you're a retail organization, retail company, they have that running on their mobile phone while they're in your store, and you can track, did they spend a lot of time around sweaters? And maybe you can take that insight about that customer and start to interact with them differently. Excuse me for a moment. You can interact with them differently. You can present new offers to them. You can learn more about them and provide better value to them. Or you might build an IoT application, Internet of Things application, a physical device. You might smarten a physical device that you create and then transfer data from it. I'll just give you an example of that. I saw a fellow who works in the global analytics division of Tetra Pak, and many of you are probably familiar with Tetra Pak. They're sort of the paper boxes that you can get liquids in. So, in many parts of the world, milk is not purchased refrigerated. It's purchased in a sort of a cardboardy kind of a box that can sit on a shelf and be stable for a long time. It's a fascinating way that they run these things. A lot of benefits. Well, they put analytics. They started to track the analytics of what was going on with their box making that goes on the site on the customer's premise. So if you're a dairy, you would have a Tetra Pak machine on your site, and you use that to sort of put your milk into it and so forth. One of the things that they were tracking was how long it took for a cut to happen when it cut the paper to wrap it around the milk. They would send this back and analyze it. And in the past, if a blade got dull, what would happen is it would just stop cutting the paper. It would be unsuccessful. The milk wouldn't get into the carton. The milk would start spilling all over the dairy building. A huge cleanup activity and downtime for the dairy. Well, they started to track these analytics and started to track how long the cut took. And what they found was that as the cuts started to take longer because the blades were duller, they could track that and then do a proactive or a early intervention to change that blade so that you wouldn't have those spills and that downtime. So that's just an example. They smartened up their box making device so they could get better uptime and so forth. So this is a kind of an example of that sort of thing. The benefits are it offers new business opportunities. Tetra Pak is able to do things with that and work better with its customers, make its customers more profitable, make them happier, raise customer satisfaction and so forth. It really reflects a new role for IT. IT used to be support the business. Make sure the invoices go out on time. tell me, how much raw materials we have on premise. Now IT is run the business. If you're an airline and you can't interact with your customers online, you don't have an airline. And this is becoming a different role for IT. And you can use new application architectures. The so-called microservices, an emerging architecture that really helps you iterate applications more quickly, respond to customer demand, new market opportunities. You can use these new application architectures when you re-envision the way you do applications, the way you deploy them and operate them. I don't know if I'd call this a drawback, but this definitely requires very sophisticated cloud skills. And you can't get there if you sort of say, I'm going to take somebody who knows how to run virtual machines on premise, that's my new cloud architect. You're not going to be able to develop these kind of applications. You need to really understand your cloud environments and so forth. So this is kind of the way you can deploy applications. Here's kind of the approach to this. From a business environment, lift and shift is very good for a stable environment. But re-envisioning is really about a transforming business environment. And I think most companies see themselves in a transforming. They feel like, boy, our business environment is changing a lot. Application changes, lift and shift is fine if you're only changing once or twice a year. But how many businesses are in that environment? They want to be able to change much more frequently. Once or twice a week, which you can do with refactoring, and really get to maybe constant. Once or twice a day, I'm going to add in new little changes, new functionality tweaks. And I want to do that as fast, as often as I want to, not how often we're scheduling change management. Your cloud commitment is different. Lift and shift, relatively low. By the time you get to re-envisioning, your cloud commitment is complete. You're really designing and operating applications that can only be run in cloud environments. And likewise, your cloud skills change. You can be relatively low with lift and shift. You need to get to moderate to high for refactoring, and you need to be at high or sophisticated with re-envisioning. Well, I hope I've convinced you that cloud computing is a huge deal through those stats, and I hope I've sort of given you a viewpoint about what you can do with applications to make them align with that new reality. The question is, how do you build those cloud skills? Because clearly they're going to be core. If you're going to get to 40% of your application portfolio running in cloud environments, jumping to 75%, maybe in another 5 years beyond that, clearly you need to have your organization needs to be staffed with people who really understand cloud. Well, I want to say that organizational skill is a journey, not a destination. RightScale is a company in the cloud space. It's been around for a long time. It helps manage applications. They do a survey each year of not just their customers, but people who are engaged with cloud computing. And they've done this for years, and traditionally the biggest barrier to cloud adoption cited by respondents was security. People weren't convinced that cloud was secure. Well, this year that changed, and now the largest adoption barrier is lack of skills and resources, meaning that people are now relatively comfortable with the security that cloud environments provide. And now they're confronting the next thing. Okay, I'm convinced cloud's a big deal. I want to start putting applications there. Oh, holy moly, I don't have all the skills on site in my organization that I have. Now, what I want to say is that a common skill base is critical, and this isn't always appreciated. But if everybody is, so to speak, on the same sheet of paper, this leads to consistent application architectures. You don't get a situation where one group designs applications one way, another group designs them a different way. Somebody takes advantage of one service in one application, somebody uses a different service in a different one, and then you end up with high operational costs because you have to have the skills to run all these different application architectures, use all these different services. You're getting different metrics, different tooling. That's very expensive. So if you use have a common skill base and common design patterns, you get much greater reusability. You get greater staff availability across things because people can be cross-trained. And it allows for greater staff assignment flexibility. To do this, to achieve this common skill base, education is a core foundation. So it ensures a common skill base. Everyone knows the same information. Everyone's gotten the same basic patterns. It trains to best practices. So you don't get something where somebody says, well, I looked at a blog post and somebody said you should do it this way, so I'm going to do it that way. Well, you don't know if that person who wrote that blog post is a genius or an idiot. And so you want to have the best practices, not just what's out there. And by using education, you can train to the best practices. You can make sure that you've got the best way to do things being put into your organization. Certifications streamline the skill building. You know, the cloud providers themselves put together a curriculum and say, this is the best way to use our environment. This is the best services to use. This is the best way to design applications to take advantage of our services. And they put those certifications out there. Well, that streamlines the process for you because you don't have to figure out, well, what are the best practices? Where do I look to find the best way to do things? Rely on the cloud providers to define that and look to that. And by using certifications, you can actually also bring skills in. You don't have to say, you know, I'm gated by how fast I can get my own personnel trained. In addition to that, I can look to the outside and say, look to external people and say, okay, I'll bring you in. Do you have the right skill set? Let me look to the certifications to figure that out. So certifications can be a tremendous benefit around this. What kind of time frame do you have for these enterprise skills? Well, you know, the survey that I talked about earlier indicates an enormous shift in deployment patterns. This is a sea change in the way that IT is going to be done. If 40% of your applications are going to be running in the cloud environment by 2020, you know, like half of your staff has to be ready a couple of years before that because you're going to be migrating your applications and building new ones. So you can't wait till 2020 and say, oh, now I better start training my people. No, they have to be ready earlier. So 50% of your staff has to be cloud ready by 2018. And that means if you're in IT management, you have to have an aggressive skill development plan. You can't sort of say, oh, I hope this will come together. Or maybe around 2018, I'll start thinking about this because it'll be important then. No, you have to start today and sort of say, what is my roadmap for developing the skills within my organization, whether I do internal training, whether I bring people in from the outside, or as most likely I'm going to do both. How am I going to go about that? How am I going to ensure that I have the right skills in place? How am I going to do that? So having an aggressive skill development plan, really critical. What's the roadmap for that? Well, one is you can rely on self-study. You know, you can sort of hand out books to your organization, or you can direct them toward YouTube, or the universal solution for everything is I'll Google it. Well, you know, all of those things are valuable resources, but what can happen is that you end up with inconsistent skills, right? One person finds one YouTube video and says, oh, that looks great, that's how I'm going to do it. A second person does a Google and they find a different solution on somebody's blog, and then you're back to that situation where one group designs it one way, another group designs it another way, they use different services and so forth. You could go to traditional IT training, and I've been involved with traditional IT training, both as a student and as an instructor, and, you know, there are some real benefits to it, but it's, you know, I'm talking about sort of, you know, go to this site, sit in a classroom, there'll be somebody standing up in the front, it'll be done Monday through Friday, or Monday through Thursday, on these dates. Well, that's fantastic if you can get free those days, if the people you need are available, if you can get them to that location. So, you know, some real drawbacks to that. Online training is an emerging field, and one that I believe in very strongly, and that's one of the reasons that I was drawn towards Simplilearn. I believe that online training is the future of the way that training is going to be done, and really it's the only one of these solutions that scales, and so it's going to be very important as you think about your roadmap going forward. So the solution must provide a common skill base. I realize I've really hammered on this, but I think this is really critical. You know, having your organization having a common analytical framework, having a common language, using the same design patterns, having the same outlook, I think it's really important. The solution has to, your training solution, your education, your skill solution, has to scale to meet aggressive timeframes. It can't be, well, we can put, you know, 3% of our staff through this year and another 6% next year. That's not going to get you where you need to be. It has to teach best practices, not just any practices. It has to align with how students want to learn. You know, it's a cliche, but today people want to work and learn the way they, in their business environments, the way they do in their personal environments. And that means I want to do stuff online. I want to do it in my own time frame. If I want to do it at 10 at night, that's when I want to do it. If I want to, do it in 20-minute chunks, that's the way I want to do it. So your education offering should really align with how students want to learn. And, my perspective is really online is going to be the way that that's accomplished. So, in conclusion, well, for sure, you want to avoid what you see on the right-hand side here. Oh, I'm giving you an excuse. The cloud ate my homework. Oh, I didn't get it done. I wasn't ready. We have this application that we can't, it's absolutely, critical to the way we're going to engage with customers going forward. Oh, I can't really do anything about it till the middle of next year because I don't have the infrastructure. So cloud computing is the future of IT. It has the fastest adoption rate in history, and there's no sign that it's slowing down. Gaining value requires climbing the deployment pattern. Remember that sort of lift and shift all through re-envision. The more value that you want to get out of IT, the more value that businesses demand from IT, the more you have to be able to climb that deployment pattern ladder. And really remember, software is eating the world. This is the best time ever to be in IT, but in a sense it's the most challenging as well because we're in a software is eating the world environment. And if you work in IT, your business is going to turn to you and say, okay, how do I operate here? How do I compete? Your training solution has to align with your deployment plans. A solution that says I can get all my people trained by 2024 isn't going to cut it. You need to build necessary, consistent skills, and that'll help you avoid lame excuses, as we have here in this cartoon. So, with that, we have time for questions. And so, Chip, do we have any questions?
Fantastic. Yes, we do. We've got a few questions queued up here that we're going to jump on here really quickly. Thank you for that presentation. I think that you absolutely have made the case for the growth of the opportunity and the need for people and organizations to plan ahead. So we do have some questions here, but before we do that, I'm going to ask everybody to indulge me for about 60 seconds while I take over the screen. I'm going to launch a little poll here and give you the opportunity to reach out to Simplilearn to learn more about the training that we offer. It's important to understand that this webinar is a public-facing webinar. We've invited Bernard here to share this information with you, and we have folks on here who have joined us who are already familiar with Simplilearn and perhaps are taking training with us, and we have some folks on here who perhaps only know about us by hearing about this webinar from a friend or seeing a social posting and joined us to hear what we had to share. But it's important for you to understand that what we do beyond the webinars is that we are a business and technology training provider. We have over 400 web-based training courses in a spectrum of professional skill sets, obviously including cloud, but also across project management and big data and digital marketing and lots of different business critical skill sets. And we have over 400 of those web-based training courses, and these are accredited, most of them, by more than 40 third-party certifying bodies like Prince2 and PMI and APMG and the Open Group and Exin and so forth. So these trainings are designed to bring your skill set up to where it needs to be to tackle the certification exams from these organizations and secure your very valuable professional certification to make yourself more effective and more desirable in this very competitive job market. All of these courses, of course, are designed and presented by our faculty of very experienced and professional trainers like Bernard himself. When you join these training programs, what you get is structured courses with a variety of different learning styles. Some folks learn better on their own time at 10:30 at night watching a video. Other folks like to have a little more direct one-on-one sort of interaction, and we do have some courses that are available where folks can interact directly with a live faculty member at specific times of the day, again virtually online from wherever it's convenient for you to do so. So it fits your lifestyle and it fits your availability. You'll get lab exercises, you'll get simulation exams in some cases, you'll get, where it's necessary, perhaps access to additional platforms and software to run experiments and do practice projects, and you get access to our moderated forums as well, so you can interact with our faculty and with other students. All that said, if you want to learn more, tick the appropriate box. We'll have someone get in touch with you. There's no obligation, but we can show you how the learning platform works, and we can help you choose the right learning path to meet your goals. All right, that's my contractual obligation to make sure you know what it is that we do here. I'm going to close that. We'll be seeing Bernard's screen here again real quick. Any second now. There we go. GoToWebinar is a little bit slow to keep up with me, but it's coming back. So Bernard, just so you know, we are seeing your screen. If you need to surf around when you're answering any of these questions, feel free to do so. So we'll jump into the questions, and I'll tackle the first one because it's the most common. When will the webinar or slide deck be available? Are you recording this? And the answer is yes, all of our webinars are recorded. Most of them are cleaned up and edited and produced and put into the Simplilearn website for folks to see, and very often they're also added to the Simplilearn YouTube channel, so if you have not gone there and subscribed already, I would recommend that you do so. All right, first question from Vivek. This goes back a little while early in your presentation. You were speaking about the growth of cloud through 2020 and beyond. Just want to clarify whether that was specific to any one particular platform or whether that was really just industry-wide we're going to see that growth rate.
The question was posed as what proportion of your applications will be in a public cloud provider. So it was not directed toward any particular cloud provider, and so that was a question designed to discern the intent of end users without trying to understand their plans for particular cloud providers or something like that. And that's why I sort of discussed it as what does this apply generally, not you need this you need AWS skills or Azure skills or whatever it might be. Just this is a trend going on in the industry. Hope that answers your question. If not, you can do a follow-up question.
Yes, I imagine that probably does, but yeah, Vivek, if you need more specifics, go ahead and ask another question with us. Terry is asking, I'm a project manager. What kind of technical skills do I need to bring along to start learning about cloud technology? How would you see the relationship between the project management skills Terry probably already has in place, and what can he add to that to make himself competitive in the cloud industry?
Well, I would answer the question in a couple of ways. One, I think it depends. Sorry, I'm not being very articulate. Let me back up. Project managers sometimes have come out of a technical background, sometimes come out of a different kind of background. And if you have a technical background, I recommend taking a sort of a foundation cloud computing course like Simplilearn has a solutions architect associate course for AWS if that's the environment you're going to be choosing, or the equivalent in one of the other environments. These are technical, but they're not sort of, oh, I'm going to teach you how to split the atom kinds of technical. And those are good introductions for that. And that's a good way to go about it. As a more general sort of what is cloud computing, what are the trends, what are the implications, so forth. I guess this is a bit self-serving, but you might take a look at the blog that I have up on CIO.com, and I often discuss cloud computing trends, adoption, the implications for IT organizations, not on a technical level, but more on an organizational level. What does this imply for the way that IT is going to do its business, and so forth? And you might find that those are helpful. So a foundation course, or perhaps reading in an area that sort of discusses what does this imply for the way that we design, develop applications and so forth. Next question.
I think that's perfect. Yeah, I hope that helps, Terry. Devanshu has a general question.
Yes, hello?
Any recommendations for what the industry opportunity looks like, particularly in that region of the world, and any particular certification certifying body that might be most appropriate for that region.
I'm sorry, Chip. At least for me, your audio dropped out right after you said the person's name and has a question about, and then it just went silent for a minute. Could you repeat the question?
Sure. Let me just double check. Are you hearing me now?
I hear you now.
Fantastic. I must have had a little drop out there. Sorry about that. Thank you, GoToWebinar. He's saying that he sees himself as a relative early starter in the cloud industry, and he is in India, and he does have experience in AWS. I'm not sure, Devanshu, whether or not you are certified in AWS, but he has experience in AWS. Curious to know any insights you might have about really establishing yourself in the industry. Are there any particular certifying bodies that are more recognized in India than elsewhere? Is there anything unique about that region?
So I'm familiar with APMG, which has a very broad range of certifications. That are some of the certifications that Simplilearn has. And then there's certifications that are vendor specific, like the AWS and so forth. What I can say is that without commenting about particular certifying bodies, I would look for ones that have adoption throughout the world, that have at least within the APMG world or the APMG ecosystem. Those are referred to as accredited training organizations. And I'm sure that the other bodies have their equivalent. And I would look for certifications that are really accepted globally. That would be my recommendation about that. I would also very strongly look at certifications that emanate from the particular vendors. And in particular AWS, because you said you were working with AWS already. AWS is opened up an India-based region, so they provide services directly from India to the Indian market. And my belief about, in particular for India and China, that a good model for what's going to happen with computing is mobile phones or telephony, telecommunications. In the US, we invented the telephone. So we have this, tremendous legacy of wired telephones, copper telephones, plain old telephone service. Well, emerging economies, when it came time for telephony, just jumped straight to mobile, because mobile is available, requires a lot less infrastructure development, it's more cost effective and so forth. I think we're going to see the same thing with computing as these economies of developing nations like India, China, become more computing intensive. They're not going to go through the stage of, well, we need to build our own data centers. We're gonna have our own tin. They'll just use somebody else's, just like the mobile telephony. So I think getting certifications around specific providers is a good strategy that I would recommend, because I think there's going to be tremendous growth of those cloud providers within developing economies generally, and India specifically.
Sounds like very good advice to me. I hope that helps, Devanshu, give you a little direction there. We've got a couple of questions from folks that are a little bit overlapping here. They're kind of asking somewhat the same questions, and you've addressed some of it in your presentation, but the questions are basically what they're saying is, I've got cloud sales, but I don't have a technical background, or I've been in the service industry for 20 years, but I want a better idea of how I can grow, in a way that I can expand my expertise while still maintaining my place in my market. What are the sort of the best recommendations for moving forward, or the path, if you will, the career path of moving from one tangentially related career path and increasing my viability in the cloud industry? So would you say that folks like this, they've got a little bit of technical background or what have you, and they want to grow in the direction of cloud and be viable in that space? Should they focus on certifications first? Should they focus on getting an opportunity for some hands-on real-world projects? Is there a balance there? What's the best path for them?
Well, I guess this maybe doesn't fully support Simplilearn, but I think if you're a salesperson and you're planning to be a salesperson for your career, I don't know that, sort of getting a technical certification is the best way to go about that. Amazon does have a very strong partner ecosystem, and I believe that they actually have certifications that are revolving around those kinds of things. And certainly, looking to, you sort of want to be in an organization aligned with this greater trend. So we talked primarily about technical stuff, but really this is going to affect every part of the IT ecosystem. So if you're a consulting company, you need to be a cloud computing consulting company. If you're a system integrator, you need to be a cloud system integrator. If you're a partner company, you need to be a cloud partner company. So, there's tremendous opportunities throughout the ecosystem, and I would suggest that look for certifications or something that align with what you do. I think that having some technical background is extremely useful, but I wouldn't necessarily look toward I'm going to go get a solution architect advanced certification so I can go sell. And I hope that's helpful, and I hope that addresses the question, Chip, that was being put forward.
I think it does. Yeah. Again, I had a couple of folks here who had some similarly related questions, and I hope that does help. I think you're right. You're looking for the way to make it sort of relevant to whatever you are already working in, and really maybe the core for some folks, if they're not going to be working in cloud directly as a cloud professional, but they're going to be tangentially related to it in sales or some other way, foundational training and familiarity with it, thus to the point at which you're sharing a vocabulary and you can speak intelligently about it with stakeholders, but you aren't necessarily going to be the implementation person, is where the value is going to land. Does that seem reasonable?
Yes, I would say that's a good plan.
All right. Let's see. We are up against the hour already. I'm hoping, if you're okay, we can maybe go 1 or 2 minutes longer and try to hit 1 or 2 more questions really quick.
Sure.
You got time? Terrific. Raghavendra is saying that he's been in, sorry, no, that's one of the ones that I already tried to address with you here a moment ago by compiling them together. Here we go. Atul, how is the cloud industry compatible and secure based on HIPAA regulations? There have been lots of changes in the medical domain. Are there any specific services or direction that you see happening in cloud that are specific to the medical domain that might be useful for medical documentation and software? Does that make sense?
Well, a big question that around cloud computing is often characterized as security, but the question really oftentimes is about compliance. And HIPAA is a compliance regimen, that has some security aspects, but also has other aspects as well. And HIPAA is just a well-known example of the kinds of compliance things. And obviously compliance regimens can be challenging. I will say that organizations have successfully implemented HIPAA compliant applications within Amazon for sure, and I'm sure this is the case for Azure as well. So it's, many people assume, oh, these can't be accomplished, these regimens can't be accomplished in a external environment or a public cloud environment, and that's not really the case. Oftentimes, one of the things that people often have to recognize, though, is with compliance, this is true about security, is it's not all just on the provider. There are actions or activities or processes that the user has to take as well. And so this can't simply be a question of, is the provider HIPAA compliant? It's, if working together, me and the provider, can we jointly deliver a solution that is HIPAA compliant, HIPAA being the example in this case? And the answer is yes, but it's not a simple, I set this, tick this checkbox in the configuration in the cloud environment, and now magically it's HIPAA compliant.
That makes perfect sense.
So really you need to be able to examine it and so forth. But it is possible, and really requires examination and understanding what the requirements are of being compliant with a particular regimen.
Perfect. Thank you for that. I hope that answers the question. We'll conflate these last two questions. They're a little bit related. We'll just knock them out real quick and then we'll be all done. Vivek is asking about Exim Cloud certifications as opposed to APMG. If you have any insight there about maybe their acceptability and relevance in the industry, whether or not they're looking for different things to gain the certification. And Suma's asking about if you have any insight into certifications relating specifically to cloud security and risk management.
Yes, so I confess I'm not familiar with Exim. I am familiar with APMG, and so and the reason I was comfortable working with APMG is because they do a wide range of certifications. They're a global organization, highly respected. So I can't really speak to Exim. And in terms of what would be considered most desirable and so forth. In terms of, I'm sorry, what was the second part of that question? It completely slipped my mind. Chip, have I lost you?
I'm so sorry. GoToWebinar is giving me a little dropout here. I apologize.
I see.
This last question is if there are any specific certifications regarding security and risk management in cloud, or does the general certifications for cloud inclusive of security and risk management issues?
Well, so there's two parts to that answer. So for example, the AWS certifications definitely have an element of security in them, no question. They're one of the domains. So it's addressed. The certification you receive, however, doesn't say security, it says solution architect associate or whatever it might be. So it definitely addresses security and what the best practices are and so forth. Sort of surprisingly, there aren't really cloud security certifications, given that it's such a topic that is been so high profile, as I mentioned. There is an organization called the Cloud Security Alliance. They have what I would call a rudimentary or foundational security certification called the CCSK. I think it's Cloud Computing Security Knowledge, I think is what it stands for. And that's widely known and recognized. I wouldn't necessarily say, oh, that holding that indicates a tremendously sophisticated level of security knowledge. It probably addresses things like compliance, but it doesn't sort of say, oh, now I'm certified to really understand HIPAA. I don't think it extends to that. It's an interesting thing that there aren't those certifications, given that it's such a high profile thing. But I would say that that's not something that you can go seek out and find and get a certification around. Maybe unfortunately, but that's the state of affairs today.
It may grow out of the evolution of the industry, though, so we'll keep our eye on it. For those of you who are still with us, we are running a little bit long, and that'll be it for the Q&A now, but I want to let you know, check real quick in your chat module, those of you who are still with us. I have shared a few links in there, including a link to Cloud Security Alliance, and then some other links that will direct you towards some other resources. There is a link there to the Simplilearn courses on virtualization and cloud computing. There are some links to some articles and resources on the Simplilearn site, as well as APMG, an article there actually by Bernard that I'm pointing you at, and then to Bernard's articles on CIO.com. and lastly, a link to other upcoming webinars and resources organized by specialty from Simplilearn. So a few little links there for you to click. Get them open now while you can, while we're still on the call, because I'm going to be shutting us down here in just a moment, but you'll have them open in your browser and you can continue to look around. So with that said, yeah, we've gone a few minutes long, but it was great to have all these questions from everybody. Bernard, it was a pleasure working with you for the first time, sir. Thanks for all your insights.
Well, thank you for the invitation to speak. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely, and we'll do it again, I'm sure. And to everybody else, thank you all so much for taking time out of your days to join us wherever you are. Again, if it's the middle of your workday or if you've stayed up super late to join us when you should be asleep, we appreciate your dedication and taking the time out of your lives to join up with us here. Join us again for future webinars on that link that I provided. And until then, have a terrific rest of your day, and we will see you next time. Cheers. Bye-bye.